Hi everyone, I'm Michael Gordon. Well, central banks like the Reserve Bank of New Zealand have lifted interest rates a long way in the last year and a half. And they're now finding themselves grappling with the question of whether they've done enough to put us back onto a path towards low and stable inflation. For our part, we've been highlighting the risk that they may need to do more. We are seeing inflation rates coming down off their eye-watering peaks, but after those initial early wins, there's a risk that we could end up with a stubborn core of homegrown inflation that could prove harder to remove. And this week, we have seen two instances of central banks that had paused their interest rate hikes earlier this year, and in fact had been praised for doing so, but have now felt compelled to spring back into action. Firstly, the Bank of Canada, which had been on hold since January, but they lifted their cash rate by 0.25% this week and noted that underlying inflation was stubbornly high. And in fact, their headline inflation rate, which had been falling previously, actually rose again in April. And then secondly, there was the Reserve Bank of Australia. Now, they only paused on one occasion back in April before they raised their cash rate in May and again this week. But what was notable this time was how their language has shifted. Previously, they'd talked about finding the balance between the inflation and full employment parts of their mandate. This time around, they were much more focused on the risks of persistent inflation. And they signalled that further interest rate increases are likely in the months ahead. So the Reserve Bank of New Zealand has said that there's a fairly high hurdle for them to raise rates again this year. So what kind of things might they be watching to decide whether that hurdle has been cleared? Well, obviously economic activity. We are seeing some signs of things slowing from where they were, but whether they're slowing by enough is the harder question. And there is something of a disconnect between the GDP figures, which are looking soft, and the labour market, where the unemployment rate is still close to a record low. The other big thing to watch, I think, is the rebound in migration, and in particular, whether it leads to a rebound in the housing market in the way that it seems to have done in Australia. And we'll be getting updates on both of those things next week. Thanks for watching. See you next time.